Hello. Hi.
Okay. That's
Here.
Okay. I'll just give it back to you when I'm done. Or, okay. Are you ready? Are we ready?
you're live.
Okay. Excellent. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here for this really exciting evening. I'm Heidi. I'm the practice manager with the clinic, and we have some of the rest of our team here too, Adam, Annie, Brooke, and we'll be sharing the time with Dr. Tenzin Namdul also for the first half, and then the second half will be our co-owners of the clinic, Fran Beganik and Guy Odishaw. So a couple little intros quickly. Please help yourself to the food and beverages all throughout. Stand, sit, just be comfortable. There's restrooms right out the door to the left. Make yourself comfortable. If you would please hold your questions till the very end. So there's a little notepad and a pen in your bags. Just write down any thoughts or questions that you have, and we'll for sure get to you at the end. And also, we'll be having some devices that you're able to try at the end. So if you can stay even later, that would be wonderful. You can try out some audio-visual entrainment or some other red light devices. So I would like to introduce to you our guest speaker. We are so honored to have Dr. Tenzin Namdul, who is a medical anthropologist and Tibetan medicine doctor who studies aging, memory, and end-of-life care through biocultural and Tibetan medical lenses. His doctoral research examined how Tibetan Buddhist perspectives on death shape caregiving and the dying process, specifically focusing on Tukdam, a post-clinical death meditation practice among Tibetan refugees in southern India. Dr. Namdul's current research investigates the factors driving cognitive and physical resilience against aging and Alzheimer's disease among Tibetan Buddhist monks. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Namdul.
All right, Tenzin, it's all you.
Thank you. Thanks, Guy. Hello, everyone. I don't know, maybe I might have met some of you early before. I don't know how many years ago, but I know Guy for quite a while. We go quite a long way back. We were just talking about last time we did a presentation among providers at the clinic that Guy and his team were running, and that was almost 16 years ago. So time flies. And it was a really fun and fulfilling experience. And this time around, when Guy reached out, it was almost from last year, and we've been working on time. And I'm so glad that we all are able to be together at this space, and people who are joining us virtually can also engage in our conversation. But before I start, I want to thank Bhakti Brain Health Clinic for this opportunity, and particularly the personal contact that I have with Guy, and now through Guy, Franz, and Anne, and Heidi, you're here. So thank you for your kind introduction. And then, obviously, for all of you to be here and engage in this conversation. I will be presenting some of the work that our team is doing and is related with brain health, and hence I'm here. But then, more than that, when we will have time later on to engage in more interactive conversation, that will be more fun. And so I'll be just sort of providing info that we were able to collect based on the work we did since 2019 and 2020. And as you all know, for the 3 years during the COVID pandemic, things got a little disrupted. But we put our foot down and say, okay, we need to do it no matter what. And so we were able to find ways to navigate during the pandemic time and finish our preliminary study on Alzheimer's disease among this particular population that I am excited to share with you guys. And then now we're working on a follow-up larger longitudinal study in the same population. So as you guys can see, of course, we're looking at the brain, right? And then by brain, it's really exciting because every time we talk about brain, we think about different things, right? One objective way of looking at brain is we look at brain through the nervous system lens, the sort of a conventional modern medicine way of looking at our brain. But then if we sort of take a few steps back, and then we think about brain, then we think about things that emerge out of our brain. Through the, again, conventional medicine, we think about the way we think, the way we feel, the way we experience emotion is related with our brain. So in some ways, the being conscious emerges out of our brain. And now the work that our team is doing, we sort of, with due respect to the brain, how we look at brain through the nervous system, through the contemporary science, but we also bring in the traditional sort of Indo-Tibetan Buddhist approach to understanding our brain, which is like there's someone who is conducting how the brain should function, and hence the mind, right? And so it's exciting when we look at the brain, then we look at the emotions and thought and feelings, then we look at someone who is riding the horse, if you will. So we will do that. And then the study that we have done, preliminary study, and then the study which we are working on right now is called LLAMAS. So these days we all need a sort of a interesting or a fancy acronym, so we call it LLAMAS, and it's a lifestyle assessment and monastic aging, or Alzheimer's. And so sometimes we use aging, but for the sake of our work right now, and as we all know, when we have to apply for R01 grant for the federal funding, we need to find, again, a specific topic that we want to work on, and hence the Alzheimer's study, and so therefore it's called LLAMAS. Now the question is really why we should study the Tibetan Buddhist monk's brain, right? We could study anyone's brain, but we choose to do that in that particular population. Well, I mean, before we go into that, we might ask or get asked, like, why we should even care about brain health, right? So we all know, and I'm sure I would see all of you as sort of a regular member or dedicated audience of the regular forum that the Bhakti Brain Health Clinic is conducting here. So we know that over the years, one thing that has changed to a huge surprise to not only researchers or clinicians, but also to policymakers is the 10 most common cause of death in the US that have changed is how the way people die due to Alzheimer's or related dementia has really gone up, almost 140%. So it is almost going next to next with the heart disease or the lungs disease, and homicide and others are now falling behind the conditions like Alzheimer's and related dementias. And so there are a host of statistics that if you go into the Alzheimer's Association website, we will find there. And so there's a huge need. It's becoming a huge public health concern. So in that backdrop, what happened in 2016 was a study was conducted. It was a more epidemiological study that was conducted in part of Tibet. And what they found was the prevalence of Alzheimer's was abnormally low. But at the same time, what they found was the certain level of cognitive resilience was uniquely and unusually high. So there was this discrepancy, and they were looking, really, they were not looking at the risk factors or protective factors, but they were just looking at why this is happening, right? And it would be easy for them to sort of extrapolate from what they could find outside of the study in the field of contemplative sciences. Oh, it could be due to meditative practice. All this population are sort of in some way, there's a stereotype that when we talk about Tibetan, oh, you must be meditating. And sometimes when you wear rosary beads, it's like, oh, I'm sure now this person must be meditating. But that might not be the case, right? So many friends that I know in my own community, they don't do meditation at all. I haven't started meditation for the longest time until when I have to start working on my own dissertation research. I was like, okay, I need to be more serious now. So that happened, and there were lots of studies that do show that there's some correlationship between one or other forms of contemplative practice and the resiliency at the cognitive level. And as most of us know, and I guess every one of us here know, that our neighboring city or a state in Wisconsin medicine, there are a lot of work happening at the Richie Davidson's lab, a brain imaging center. They have been doing lots of work in past a decade or more, and in recent years they have started a center called Center for Healthy Minds. So they're doing lots of work, and we can, looking at that, we can sort of glean that, okay, oh, there must be some association. There might not be the cause and outcome, but some association. But again, there's a problem, right? Because the study that has been conducted and the findings that we see out there in the literature, it's done in a pretty controlled environment. So it's in the lab, and people are self-reportedly, if they have invested their thousands of hours of time in meditating, and there are some other people who got like 6 weeks or then 4 weeks or a few days of meditation practices, and they were invited, and then their brain was scanned, and then they get some information. Of course, we look at the fMRI, then we understand where the blood is flowing and which part of the brain is sparking electrical current. But we have to see that, okay, how it works down there, out there in the wild, not really in the controlled environment in the lab. So we have to not only replicate the study, but we need to also reconfirm some of the things that they have postulated in their study that they, Hong et al. Published in 2016. So it's really hard to go to Tibet, particularly someone like me as a researcher. My name is Tenzin, and Tenzin is a very common Tibetan name. If you go into any Tibetan community and shout out Tenzin, half of them will look at you. So it's a very popular, yet it's quite sensitive name, because anyone who has Tenzin as a first name has received name from the Dalai Lama. So I haven't really gone by myself to receive a name, but my parents, when I was conceived, they would in advance request a name from the Dalai Lama's office, and then everyone who got name from the Dalai Lama's office, the first name would be Tenzin. And when we had a chance to talk a little more in the end, I'll be happy to indulge in that. What does Tenzin mean? Why Tenzin always is the first name when we receive name from his office? So then we have to scout place outside of Tibet, right? And as probably most of you know, that outside of Tibet, India is the country where there's the largest cohort of Tibetan refugee community. And more so in southern India. 3 of the largest Tibetan monastic universities are located in southern India, and which were reestablished in early 60s when the Dalai Lama and a few thousands of Tibetans escaped into India from Tibet. And that's how, in consultation with the Indian Prime Minister at that time, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, they reestablished all the schools. And all the Tibetan schools in India, now looking back, the school that I went to, a boarding school, those are all charter school. All the schools that all Tibetans were sent, we have all the Indian Board of Education curriculum, but then we get to study Tibetan language and Tibetan culture. So we say, okay, let's go and see if we can do some work at the monasteries. And as I have here, in addition to a very similar sort of cultural milieu that used to be in Tibet before Tibet was invaded, prior to 1950, those settlements have a very similar way of living. And the sort of communal infrastructure landscape, I mean not the environmentally, but the way they have structured it, the landscape right now is very similar. So we went there, we met with all the abbots of 6 monasteries that we began with. They have close to 16,000 monks and nuns. And so we worked with, and one thing that we know when we sort of were thinking about doing our study there was, due to the fact that they were all monastic, we were able to eliminate some of the confounding factors, right? And so we think about food, diet, we think about use of tobacco, we think about use of alcohol. So those so in this monastic community, maybe there could be individual monks here and there they might have used, or they're using tobacco in different forms. Sometimes they might chew tobacco, but on a larger scale, we can't find any monk who would indulge in alcohol consumption or smoke or use of tobacco. And the exercise also, they don't necessarily have sort of a sporting event or culture of playing sports regularly, but they do engage in some normal exercise in terms of walk and other similar, like they do prostration, a little bit like the Surya Namaskar in yoga asana, and so they do that, but in a little less rigorous than the asana in yoga. So these are some of the reasons, and some of the other things that we have mentioned in our recently published paper. We can't, due to time constraints, share everything, but these are some of the key things. And also I wanted to quickly share that, as Heidi mentioned earlier, that my dissertation work was looking at how Tibetans in that same geographical area are dying. So I was, when I was practicing Tibetan medicine in India, for some reason I was quite intrigued by the way people are dying. And fortunately, around that time, I had a chance also to be one of the field investigators to go around, collect data from some of the Buddhist practitioners who were willingly and intentionally prolonging their meditation even after their clinical death. So, which Heidi mentioned earlier, is called tuktam. So again, this is a different topic, so we won't get into that. But what I observed was, so I spent a year and a half or close to 2 years in my field site. And so as an anthropologist, as you all know, we really have to get our hands dirty, right? So we have to pull up our sleeves and go there, and we have to spend time there. And so I lived with monks and in the monastery for 18 or a little more than that months. And what I realized was they see me more as someone who is always around when someone is dying than a researcher. Or I taught English and science there, and I sat in the clinic to see patients in the Tibetan medicine division. And so every time someone is dying, they would just give me a ring or text me. And so I observed close to 170 people who were dying. And a lot of people died in a very peaceful way. Some people had some resistance, and dozens of people stayed in that tuktam meditation practice while they were dying. But sort of an overall theme that I picked up, some of the themes were being extremely aware and concentrated at the time of dying. And it's not so easy to do that, right? As we all know. It's one thing to think about death or talk about death, but it's a completely different thing to die. So as we are dying, right, we experience different things, and most of the time it's not really pleasant ones in terms of how we feel externally and how we feel internally. And so in some of the ancient texts in traditional wisdom, and here in the context of Tibetan Buddhist traditions, if we had a chance to look at some of the tantric texts, most common one is the Tibetan Book of the Dead. There's a very detailed and nuanced explanation of how things will change externally that we can observe, and how the dying person will experience internally what kind of things that they can visualize and see, which in sort of a conventional medicine and in lay people's term, we use, sometimes we say, oh, a person is hallucinating, or person is experiencing something that is related with the someone who had died before. But in the tantric texts is all the changes, biochemical changes that's happening in our body, and it make you see, think, and experience different things. So that's a common theme. And when I got introduced to this particular study, of doing study on Alzheimer's, because I was a latecomer in this particular study. Folks who were planning on it, they haven't studied the study, and then they asked if I want to join, and I felt like, wow, this really correlates with my dissertation work. Unfortunately, folks who were already working on this study ended up becoming my mentors. And so it was really helpful for me doing a postdoc, working with them, and sort of bringing in my dissertation work. Because when we die, most of the time we die as we age. And most of these people who were dying were in 70s and 80s, and some of them in 90s. And when we are looking at the cognitive health, the brain health, we, again, in Alzheimer's particularly, we are looking at the same aging population. So these are some of the people, and certainly they all have given consent for us to use their images. And so these are, and the monk that we see here, he died a few years ago, but he was my neighbor. So he lives right next to my small room. And so we might have spoken, I don't know, just 3-4 times during my time, or 18 or 19 months. He really, very rarely he talks, but we always look at each other, and he's sort of sitting there and in his own contemplative mode. And if he needs something, he would just note to me or point towards something, and I'll go and try to assist with his needs, whether it's a water or a food or fruits. So the key research questions, and here we want to see if it's the same findings that we could find in this population. So this whole monastic community, we want to see if there's any cases of dementia or Alzheimer's in this population, and if their way of living, because we don't want to just focus on the meditation or contemplative practice, but overall the way how they live and their diet, and then the general worldview / perspective about their life could provide any kind of either a risk factor if we find more cases of Alzheimer's or dementia, or even a mild cognitive impairment compared to the study that was published in 2016. And if so, what's the risk factors? Or if we don't find anything, and if we are able to reaffirm the findings that they published in that paper, then what could be the protective factors? So it's a very quick glance over here. We don't want to spend too much time on this, but I just wanted to let you guys know what we did. And so we recruited a little more than 200 monks. And these monks are 55 or older monks, and we collected, we did a really pretty expanded survey when we were collecting data, and certainly it includes their demographics, physical activities, mental health, the day-to-day physical life or physical activities. We use different cognitive measures to get information about how they are doing cognitively. And then we all know how important sleep is. And so we studied their sleep using a device called Actigraph. And then we did a physical examination of their height and weight, and just to get a very rough estimate of their BMI. Sometimes we use body circumference, but for this study, we used the BMI. And then, of course, the blood pressure, and we looked at the metabolic disorder in terms of diabetes and heart conditions. And some of these other data that we collected. In terms of biospecimen, we collected saliva for genetic tests, as well as we collected urine samples from this population. And so if we look at the demographic, we see that in terms of place of birth, most of these participants or the monks, they were born in Tibet. And so these are the monks who came to India either during the early 60s or in 70s and 80s. And most of these monks are in younger ones in 60s, but most of them in 70s and 80s. And we also sort of refer to them as the sort of the tail end of wisdom keeper. And so I think some of you might have heard about the study being done up in Duluth. They have a division called memory keeper. So they're doing study with the native elders, and these are the ones who are the memory keeper. But these monks, and some of them have died since we did our preliminary study, these are really the ones that we can gather wisdom and the cultural information which might which you might lose in next 5 to 10 years. In terms of the education, we can see the almost 80% of them are highly educated. So when we talk about monastic training, sometimes we get not a clear understanding or a little bit of misunderstanding that when we go to monastery, the training is really saying prayers and doing rituals and so forth, and giving counseling to local community members. But if we go to any of this monastic university, it's almost same as like in prior time in India, there's a Nalanda University, where you go and have a very rigorous study of philosophy, psychology, and debate. And it ranges from 22, 24 years to close to 30 years of continuous training in these fields. So similar to how Plato and Socrates and Aristotle, during those times, how they were training themselves. And almost 45% of these monks, they ended up being teachers either in these monasteries, or they would have their centers all around India, or now these days more and more centers are coming up outside of India or outside of Tibet in the West, and so they would be a teacher. So general health condition we could see here. In terms of when we ask them, how do you feel about their health? Majority of them say they feel good, they have sense of feeling of good to very good to excellent, right? And so close to 76, 78% of them, they feel good about their health. But so they all have the health card. And so each monk in last decade or so, the Dalai Lama has really emphasized them to be more careful with their health, because they were monks due to the very tropical climate and the completely different set of weather and environmental condition in southern India. Many of the monks, when they get into 60s or 70s, they succumb to different infectious illnesses. And so they have a specific health card. And so when they give us a consent to refer to those, we found that significant number of them have a metabolic disorder. So we see here more than 20%, 23% of diabetes, gastritis issue, chronic gastritis issue, high blood pressure, 25%, and it's quite high in that small population. And in terms of exercise, pretty low, right? As I said before, the strenuous exercise in a week average is close to an hour and a half. Moderate, close to 3 hours only in a week time. And then mild exercise, they go for a walk in the morning or in the evening. It's really hot in that area around the year. And so this is the time early in the morning. If you're up 5 in the morning, you would see almost like hundreds of monks on the road. They will be just walking back and forth. And so that's the most that they do in terms of exercise. In terms of their weight and BMI, you can see close to more than 80% of them are overweight. And now when you come to sleep, they are hardly getting the prescribed hours of effective sleep that they should get. They are sleeping, if we can see here, they are getting close to 5 hours of sleep, every night. And when we put them actigraph, so they have to wear actigraph for 72 hours, and we will measure not only the sort of the length of the sleep, but also how long they're in a bed and how many hours they actually sleep, and what's the efficiency of sleep. So as we all know, efficiency of sleep is really, if someone fall asleep and then they wake up, are they able to go back to sleep right away or not? Most of the time, we do fall asleep, but then when we wake up in the middle of the night, it's really hard to go back to sleep. Or some people are able to go back to sleep right away. And so the sleep efficiency is not really that good, even though it's not extremely bad, but close to 77 or 80% of them. Oops. So finally, this set of data, we measure the cognitive health, and we could see that the 88 is the well standardized cognitive scale that we use all the time. MoCA is something that we use all the time, right? But when we use that cross-culturally, there's a certain limitations. So we can see that even the 88, I say 8 questions, so Alzheimer's disease scaling, close to 30% of them seem to have one or other conditions that we might refer to them as having Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment. Something like MoCA also showed a close to 24% of them. A genetic marker, only 4% when we analyzed their saliva. When we did the MRI, we only did the 20 monks as a sample so that we can show that we can do a larger longitudinal study. And these are all, we only selected these 20 monks. First, of course, they give us a consent. The second, they give us a consent also to do a clinical cognitive test, which is being run by a psychiatrist who came with us to southern India. And then those who are older than 85. So all of them, MRI showed a normal findings, and we couldn't find anything. So based on the metabolic disorder that we see, the BMI, higher range of BMI, in terms of overweight, in terms of lack of good sleep, we might think that, oh, okay, there's all these risk factors that we could see, and there could be at least some cases of Alzheimer's disease. And as we all might be guessing, we didn't find anything. There was a 0 case of someone with Alzheimer's or dementia or even a mild cognitive impairment. And really, it was sort of we were okay if our hypotheses were rejected, because we were thinking, oh, okay, we can reaffirm that the studies that were published in 2016, we can find the same thing. But we were also really keeping ourselves prepared that, okay, maybe we might get proved wrong, and especially when we saw the substantial number of metabolic disorder. So we went 2 years ago to present our findings to all the monasteries, and our final presentation to all the abbots and the senior teachers came. And so we presented our findings, and we discussed with them what could be the secret sauce here. What could be the protective factors? Because you guys have all the risk factors that we could find someone with Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment, and we didn't find anything. And as we found in our data and some of the data that I showed to you guys, 2 things they told us and we saw was they were all not only highly educated, but lifelong learners. They don't stop learning. So even these monks who were, as you see, they were in 80s or 90s, but they were always in touch with their text. They were always engaging in debate. And so debate is one of the primary mode of training young monks and nuns. And so it's really like a dialectical way of educating oneself and others, right? And so, thank you. And then the other thing is, of course, meditation practice. But again, here, is the main thing that I wanted to share with you guys is meditation practice is not necessarily just staying still and sort of having a non-judgmental observation of everything that's happening in our mind or in our brain, or just kind of a sitting still and just try to be in touch with the sound and the sensations and just be with that. And so meditation for people or the participants that we studied, it means way more than what we have understood in this part of the world, which is like mindfulness meditation. Now we talk about self-compassion. Now we talk about sense of reframing, reappraising different situations. But for these people, for these monks and nuns, meditation is just a way of living. From the morning when they get up and the time when they go to the bed. And for some practitioners, even when they were asleep. And so they will engage in a lucid dream. So this is education I wanted to show to you guys. So these are some of the meditation that they indulge in. And every day they spend almost 7 to 8 hours in their kind of meditation practices. And so they're doing things, but they're meditating. And so mindfulness, of course, because you need to kind of set the stage, right? And you need to regain your composure, and then you need to analyze things, you need to recite a mantra, then you need to contemplate on these mantras, because each of these mantras have a very nuanced meaning to it. So we're working on our larger study, hoping that we could submit our one grant proposal start of this fall. And as we all know, just to contextualize what we found in American society is, if we have done the similar study in the US and collected 200 participants and look at how their brain health is, based on all the data out there in cloud and the literature, existing literature, we should found at least 6 people with Alzheimer's or dementia. And we didn't find anything, any number of cases in this population that we studied. And so we are constantly in conversation with program officer at the National Institute of Aging, and they are as excited as we are, and they're really sort of working with us to make sure that we turn in our grant proposal and start our study. Anyway, so sort of a very quick look at what we are trying to do, and somehow really overlaps with work that everyone here at the Bhakti Brain Health Clinic is working on. So I'll be happy to engage in interactive discussion at the end of the presentation today. So thank you for your attention.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah. All right, that's a lot of buttons. Okay, well, thank you, Tenzin. That was absolutely delightful, and I have to say I was kind of shocked at 2 points. The kind of health risk factors were a lot higher than I anticipated. I expected to see their overall health profile be better. That's my imagination of what life in that culture would bring. But then I also was not expecting a 0 for cases of Alzheimer's. So fascinating, and I can understand now why the research is so compelling. And then, so I'll just say that also I appreciated that you brought in the part about the death and dying and peace, and so the folks from the clinic know, but so I'm with my mom, we're kind of in that phase right now, both dementia and she's on her way out. So I've had that opportunity to kind of spend time with her from that perspective as well. And it's all so far just been a very sweet occurrence, and I have gratitude for the grace of it, but tonight was, yeah, thank you. So we're going to talk about brain health from a completely different perspective, but not as completely as you might think. So some of the things we always like to talk about is who our mentors are and kind of who we've followed in the path of. It says a little bit about what we do and how we do it and why we do it. And then we always get this question, is there research on what we do? Absolutely. You can see here, so we're approaching 4 million studies in the general area of electrical stimulation. So that's enough. And then if we break it down into some different subcategories and conditions, you can still see there's quite a bit of research. If you've ever tried to go and read some of the research on something, if you get through 3 studies, you win. But if there's 20,000, safe to say, not going to get to all of them. So one of the things that I'm finding very fascinating about what's happening in the area of bioelectric medicine and just biology in general is how the language is shifting to sound more like traditional medicine, something like traditional Tibetan medicine. And one of the things that's talked about in the traditional forms are things about energy and about the flow of energy and the importance of harmony in the flow of energy. And if you've spent time kind of studying those traditional forms, you're used to that language. It's not the language of Western scientific medicine. But these days we're seeing more and more of that happening, where they're starting to see that indeed we are a flow of energy. And that's some of the perspective we're going to talk about tonight. So this is a little bit kind of the old paradigm, new paradigm. So the old paradigm is a little bit more of a mechanical model. Genes determined everything. I think Tenzin did a good job of pointing it out. But also here, the most recent stats are saying about 7% influenced by your genetics. So that leaves a lot of room. And then Tenzin pointed to a number of the factors that make up that 93% of general kind of lifestyle factors, and then pointed to some of the ones that are, demonstrably carry much more weight than some of the other ones that we might think of. And I would say we see that in our own clinical findings as well. So there's this model that's kind of coming more into popular culture, this idea of a body budget. And the idea is that the brain is kind of the CEO of the organization, and the CEO's job is resource allocation. So how is the brain allocating resources throughout the body? So we often think about the brain in terms of cognition, so brain related to thinking. But the biggest thing that the brain spends its time doing is running the body. So when we're working with people, and you're going to see an example later of neurofeedback, the conversation is always, well, will it improve my memory? Will it improve my executive function? And the answer is, of course, we hope yes, it will do that. But what is missed is, will it help regulate my blood sugar? Will it help regulate my blood pressure? Will it help my digestion? All of these factors of just all of the nuance of keeping the body going, the brain is managing all of that, and that's the biggest job that it has. So one of the things, there's another part of neuroscience that's getting more attention is this idea of predictive processing. So we think things, like we think about it when it's happening, but it turns out that nope, our brain is predicting multiple scenarios, and then what happens in the world lines up with one of those, and then that's what we call reality. So our brain is always predicting ahead of time. And if you've ever had the experience of maybe like you thought somebody was going to hit you and you said ow before, right? That's predictive processing. That was your brain anticipating this looks like I'm about to get hit, and getting hit hurts, and then the response, right? So this is what our brain is doing all the time, is, what happens. And so in the world of we talk a lot about trauma. Trauma, a word that has been used around that is kind of safety. And so this is shifting a little bit to this idea of certainty. And it turns out that what our brain runs on is certainty. And when our environment lacks certainty, it's really hard on our nervous system. So this could be an alcoholic parent, maybe, that is not, how they interact, how they move through the world is not predictable. That could bring the uncertainty. There could be any number of things that will bring that to you. Changing schools, so you think of a military child that changes schools often. There's a lot of things that can undermine the certainty. You might say the world we're living in right now, there's a lot of uncertainty in our day-to-day, and the effect that just has on disrupting this basic function of our biology. So what we see here is just kind of a graphic representation that what happens when there's uncertainty, it drives our metabolism into running multiple scenarios of what might happen, right? So now we're running more scenarios of the things that could happen, preparing for all of them, and that just burns our body budget. Right? So what that will do is it can cause we can have an increase in cortisone or cortisol, we can have an increase in glucose, because the brain is just chewing away on all possibilities. Brain uses a lot of energy, so more glucose production. What this leads to, something we think about as diabetes, which is an insulin resistance. So there's this model emerging of not just insulin resistance, but kind of energy resistance, right? So there's a resistance of flow, the movement of energy in our system, and we want to think about energy and information at the same time, right? So not just energy like fuel, but energy and information. So our system then kind of gets congested, and we don't have the flow that we need. And so that's part of this model being put forward by Christopher Picard. He's on the energy side of this. Lisa Baert's on the body budget side, and these two fit together very nicely. So what we have is this model where on a day-to-day, we should have a good energy reserve that is used for growth, maintenance, and repair. But when our system is stressed, and again, uncertainty, we're running a lot of scenarios, our brain is consuming a lot of energy, that takes away our energy for the growth, management, and repair, and puts us more in a survival mode. So one of the signals that has been kind of come out in recent research, and this is really into the mitochondrial level, so understanding what's happening in our mitochondria, that there's this GDF-15 marker that rises when we're in chronic stress. And then what can happen is that marker can go in a number of different places, but one is it goes to the brain, and the brain's response to that is to elevate blood sugar and lower energy consumption overall. So we see that our body kind of moves almost towards something that we might, on the outside, assess as a depression, starts to look like a depression. Right? So we're revving the engine and slamming on the brakes at the same time. And this becomes the state of our body kind of moving into this static place. So then this can disrupt the brain in terms of brainwave communication. It can disrupt the flow of information, so thalamic cortical dysrhythmia is the fancy name for it. Think Grand Central Station, the flow of information in and out of the brain. So if your train arrives too late, your other train has already left, you're not going to get where you're going. Think about the same thing for information in the brain. So if we add all of these together, the things that I've talked about, we've got a decreasing body budget, we've got energy resistance, so we're losing our flow, we have stress markers moving through our system, which is driving more insulin into the system, building our energy resistance, and we're collapsing our body budget. So this is where many of us are kind of hanging out in our state of health day to day. And then there's a question of what effect does this have on us and our brain? And we see that this is a leading factor in dementia. So what do we do about it? We kind of have two levers that we can pull. So we can lower the expenditure of energy that we're doing during the day, so we can lower our activity level, and we can increase energy production. These are our two levers to pull. So Tenzin talked about it really well, about the effects of meditation. So here, just showing the difference between just gentle walking, sleeping, and deep meditation. You get about a 40% increase in energy conservation in deep meditation. Right? So very restorative for our body budget. So one of the interventions we do, audiovisual entrainment. So this also is similarly about helping to regulate the autonomic nervous system and improve heart rate variability. This is another piece of that same kind of lowering the body's consumption of energy, making it run more efficiently. Fran is going to talk a little bit more about audiovisual entrainment. Here we see some of the things that happens, the autonomic, the heart rate variability, increasing cerebral blood flow, so we get more toxins out, more nutrients in, increasing mitochondrial activity, more ATP production, producing energy, but also intercellular communication, because it isn't just about energy, it's about energy flow. So here are some of the benefits of the audiovisual entrainment, all correcting some of the issues that I had mentioned in the beginning that comes up as our energetic system starts to become congested and slow down. Audiovisual entrainment just goes down the list of helping to correct all of those. So this one comes out of the MIT study. So pulsing gamma through the eyes helps clear amyloid plaque. So a problem with dementia is the buildup of amyloid plaques. And I would say that's more of a downstream effect of it. It's often these days held as a cause, but I'd say it's more of a downstream sequelae of this process that I'm talking about, the lowering of the flow of energy and the diminishing of the body budget means the brain can't clear what would otherwise be naturally cleared. So then another one of our approaches is photobiomodulation, so putting red near-infrared light transcranial into the brain. And so this is just an active trigger to the mitochondria. It just fuels the activity of mitochondria. A way to think about it is the water inside a mitochondria kind of thickens, becomes a gel. It can't move. Just like an engine, if your oil was frozen, if you're from Canada, you know what this is like. In the winter, your engine block freezes. So putting in the energy helps get that water in the mitochondria to be more fluid, to literally flow, increase the movement of ions, increases the production of ATP and energy. So again, it takes us from a congested system to a system that's flowing and producing energy. So here again, a little bit more about what does the infrared light do for the brain. A lot of positives, actually 35 positive benefits that come from photobiomodulation to the brain. Really wanted to touch on the ones that were specifically about this piece of the flow of energy and how light helps get our mitochondria moving, firing, and restore that body budget. And so audiovisual entrainment and photobiomodulation as two of our key interventions. We talk about brain health, in particular, the aging brain, and something that might be moving down the path of a neurodegenerative disease. And here's a look at what one of our approaches. So near-infrared helmet, glasses with photic entrainment, nasal laser, ear lasers, and binaural beats, ear clips for transcranial stimulation. So we have a lot of modalities, all about helping the brain kind of find its path back to a state of harmony, that restore that thalamic cortical loop and get the mitochondria producing more ATP. With that, Fran is going to come up and take you the next leg of the journey.
Nicely done. Okay, so I want to spend a little bit of time talking with you about one of the parts of our brain that uses energy a lot, takes up a lot of our energy resource. that is the default mode network. And the default mode network is like, it's the ruminator of your brain. It's the thing that keeps you kind of thinking about the thing that person said 2 days ago that you can't get out of your head, or the part of the brain that has you continuously just going back and forth on what's going on in your system. We often refer to it as kind of like the self-referential network of the brain, but it is by sort of nature a worrier. And so it sucks up about 20% of the energy that your brain uses, so at any given time. So it's important for us, we don't want to stop the default mode completely, but it's important for us to appreciate how much energy this part of our brain, this network in our brain, uses up. And if you think about the idea of sometimes what can happen with a brain network is it can kind of get stuck on. So we kind of get stuck in a network like the default mode network. And when that happens, it increases the amount of energy that our brain is having to use to kind of keep going in default mode. And so it's going to have to pull that energy from somewhere else. So Guy talked a little bit about kind of old paradigm, new paradigm. I'm going to talk about that too, but this is in a little bit of a different take on things. So I want to introduce this idea of aperiodic noise. So if you think about, imagine that you are at a school, let's say a high school, and you are outside of the high school, standing outside the music room, looking in the window, and you're watching and you can see somebody clapping, and they're doing this rhythmic clap, right? And it's just this same pattern over and over and over again. That's a periodic process happening. It's repeated and regular. So then imagine you decide to walk in the school, so you open up the door to the school, and suddenly you hear kids talking, you hear the shuffling of footsteps, you hear papers being thrown around, somebody's slamming a locker, you hear the tone of a school bell, all of that noise starting to happen, but it's not happening in any regular pattern, right? It's just kind of chaotic in the way it's being presented. That is this idea of aperiodic noise. Okay? So if you think about that in regards to the brain, that happens in our brain, and our default mode can be a real stinker when it comes to that. It can really contribute to that idea of aperiodic noise. So there's been a lot of research done looking at, Tenzin's talked about it, Guy mentioned it a little bit, like doing research on monks and meditation. And so a lot of the research has been looking at the idea of, or assuming the idea that monks who meditate regularly, that they're producing a lot of 40 hertz gamma waves. So that's been kind of the common belief for a long time since they've been doing these studies. There's some recent studies out, and one that was published just in 2026 in the Journal of Consciousness, that they worked with, it's a small sample size, so keep that in mind, but they worked with 12 monks who had, one of the requirements was they needed to have kind of clocked in at least 15,000 hours of meditation in order to be included in the study. And so what they did with them in the study was they had them meditate, so do different forms of meditation. Tenzin was talking a little bit about different forms of meditation. So they'd have them meditate for 6 minutes, some form of meditation, then they would take a 3-minute break, and then they would do another form of meditation for 6 minutes and a 3-minute break. And what they found as they were mapping the brains of these monks while they were doing this meditation process was that they, one of the things they did once they got their data was they separated out the periodic waves, so the rhythmic waves, so gamma is a brain wave. It's a rhythmic or a periodic wave. Alpha is a periodic wave. They separated those out from kind of the baseline noise of the brain, the aperiodic wave. And what they found is that those monks weren't actually creating more gamma, but that what had happened is that the background noise, that aperiodic noise, had quieted down significantly, and specifically within the default mode network. And so that idea of being able to kind of quiet the noise so that it wasn't taking up as much energy, right? And then the task of meditating, right, which anybody who has tried to meditate even once can really appreciate, it is a task. Like it takes a lot of, it takes practice, and that's all it ever is practice, practice. And so I'm going to move on because I want to get to some pieces of this. And I just realized, Guy, that we did not ask somebody to be a volunteer. So I'm going to break my presentation for 1 minute. When I'm done speaking, we're going to do a demonstration of neurofeedback. But in order to do that, we need somebody to volunteer to be our neurofeedback brain for the night. So is anybody in here interested or at least willing to do that? Okay, excellent. So what's your first name? Colleen, I think I'll have you come up here by Adam. Adam's gonna be your technician. He's just gonna start getting you wired up so that by the time I'm done talking, he'll be all ready to go and we can show you some live demonstration of neurofeedback. Okay, thank you for volunteering. The kind of the whole idea here is that piece about being able to quiet down the brain. So in the brain health clinic, when we do a brain mapping, a quantitative EEG, we one of the analyses we look at is brain network. So we can see when somebody has a brain network that is running inefficiently. And we get a lot of people who have issues with focus, who have anxiety struggles going on, and depression, those kinds of things. And oftentimes, when we do the brain mapping and analyze that brain, we find that the default mode network is not working efficiently, right? And so what we can do with that is we can work on regulating the default mode network, and thus then creating, not getting completely rid of the aperiodic noise, but balancing it out. So that this 1/f slope and that is showing up here is a mathematical equation that just really is looking at, this is showing us that when somebody has a resilient brain, they have a pretty steep 1/f slope. When they don't, and their brain is more hyperactive, particularly in areas like the default mode, that slope starts to flatten out. There's a lot more of that kind of chaotic background noise than there ought to be for optimal brain functioning. And so when so those monks, if we were to apply this to them, we would see that they each, when we did their data, would have a pretty steep 1/f slope because they had much less of that background aperiodic kind of chaotic noise happening. So what we do in the brain health clinic is really address these kinds of things. And one of the things I love about what we do, people come in to see us because they tell us they have an issue. I've got anxiety, I've got depression, I've got ADHD, whatever it might be. From our perspective, it kind of doesn't matter what their symptoms are or what their diagnosis is, because our goal is always the same thing. We want to optimize the brain so that it can engage in the tasks that that person wants it to engage in a successful way. And so when you look at that idea of quieting down the noise, right, and that's not the only thing that needs to be done, but if that noise remains loud, the brain is just going to keep using more and more energy doing that, and then it has less energy for what other tasks we want it to do. So one of the ways to do this is, what the research has shown us then and shows us now, is any kind of contemplative practice, meditation of some sort, can seem to have a significant impact on being able to lessen that noise, that chaotic noise. What we bring to this in the clinic is a way of supporting somebody kind of being able to develop those kind of practices, right? So if you've ever meditated, you know mind goes like this all of the time, right? All of the time. And so I have clients all the time who refuse to meditate because I can't do it, I can't do it. And it doesn't, the concept of, yes, this is practice, so that's the idea, right? Can be challenging, especially if they're struggling with something else, right? So we can bring in we can kind of engineer this from a neurotherapy standpoint to be able to support somebody in being able to start working on practicing those kinds of states. And so Guy talked about photobiomodulation. That is one of the strategies we could use to support the brain and its energy. But when it comes to kind of quieting that chaotic aperiodic noise, we use things like audiovisual entrainment, which Guy had mentioned to you. It's kind of like it can inject some energy into the brain in a way that can help to kind of quiet down the chaos. We use neurostimulation, so we might do transcranial alternating or direct current stimulation as a way to optimize the brain so that it's putting energy into the places that it should be putting it into for optimal performance. We can do 19-channel Z-score Loretta neurofeedback, which is what we're going to show you in just a minute, which is a way of really helping the brain to kind of plug up the leaks. So when we go back to talking about that default mode, this is where 19-channel neurofeedback can really shine, because we can optimize somebody's default mode through neurofeedback training. And as we do that, we're going to create a brain that has a much more balanced kind of aperiodic to periodic equation going on. And then Guy had mentioned heart rate variability training as well, and we're going to be able to show you a little bit of that as we do our demonstration here as well. This is just an image of audiovisual entrainment. Guy kind of talked about it, so I feel like I don't need to say a whole lot more about it. I am going to show you a quick video because every time I watch it, I just am amazed at two things. One, at the brain and what technology can do for our brains. It's just, when you see it, you'll hopefully appreciate it. And we've got these in the back, so those of you who are not familiar with them, stop back, try one out after we're done with our presentation, and get a little bit of a sense of what impact audiovisual entrainment can have. So I'm going to show you this video. This is actually going to be a video we're going to look at Adam's brain, his EEG tracings, a year younger than they were tonight, right, Adam? Because for those of you who didn't hear earlier, it's Adam's birthday. And he wanted to spend it here with us, can you believe it? So what Adam and I did is we wired Adam up, put the cap on him, and I started recording his brain waves. We also had an audio-visual entrainment device on him, and we're going to turn it on at some point in time. So when we first look at this video, what you're going to see is Adam's brain waves doing a whole lot of beta, mostly beta wave. There might have been a little bit of fast beta in there too, because he's just sitting there thinking about whatever it was he was thinking about while we were doing the recording. And then I said to him, okay, and he pushed the button for the AVE to turn on. We had it running an alpha protocol because alpha waves are easy for anybody to recognize when you're, at least to notice a change in when you see them on an EEG. What I want you to notice about this and appreciate about this is how quickly that AVE device moves that brain from a state of kind of like busy brain to calm, kind of meditative state. Okay, so right now this is, we're just seeing a bunch of beta wave here. Adam's just kind of sitting there thinking about things. Notice the timestamps down here. We're at just about a minute right now. And what you're gonna start to notice shortly is some brain waves that look different than the rest of them. This is like one of those, you know, what looks different than the others. Did you just see some, Annabelle? Because I just saw you pointing, okay. So that was at like 1 minute and 20 seconds. Now look at this. This is all alpha wave happening. Oh, that's at 1 minute and 20 seconds. That was, and so we're starting to see his brain start to pulse at that same rate that the audiovisual entrainment device is pulsing at. And what we're gonna see just shortly here is his brain just starting, like we're seeing it in a few spots, but we're gonna start to see it just begin to propagate in all of these different areas of the brain. We're now just under 2 minutes. There it goes. Isn't that just lovely? So we're at 2 minutes, just under 2 minutes, and Adam's brain has started to produce the same frequency that we have been introducing to him. Now, most AVE protocols run somewhere between 15 to 40 minutes, just kind of depending on the protocol. So you can appreciate if you spent even 15 minutes with the AVE on, how that brain would start to just be in that state. And so it can kind of gently guide, so we can use that neurotechnology as a gentle guide to help people start to move into that. The idea is not to have this take the place of meditation or contemplation or anything like that, not at all. It's about giving the brain resources to be able to help it do the thing that we might want it to do, right? And I see that we're done, that Heidi's giving me the time signal. So I think what we're gonna do is we will move to the neurofeedback. So we need to switch screens here. I'm gonna let you just.
Process of joining us? Yes.
Beautiful. Yeah, I'll do this part, you can do HRV, okay? Okay, so Adam, are you able to make that bigger, or is that as big as it gets?
It's as big as I can make it on that.
That's it then. Just leave it there. So we're now looking at Colleen's brain waves, right? So thank you for sharing them, they're beautiful. So some of the things you can see, so each one of these lines over here lines up with one of the sensors on that cap that she has. So we're recording information about her brain from all of those different areas of her brain. And you can see over here, we call these head maps. They are the different periodic waves, the brain waves, right? Delta, theta, alpha, and so on. And so these maps can kind of help us to see where there might be some functional irregularities happening as we're training Colleen. You want to go ahead and start our training? So what we do with neurofeedback is we use technology to operantly condition the brain. So I'll explain to you what I want you to do in just a minute as soon as Adam gets you going there. So she's going her brain is going to play a video game. So you notice she does not have any controls in her hands. So what happens with this video game is all about what her brain is doing. Her brain wave information is getting fed into a computer database that is normed. Typically it would be, we didn't do this for you, but it would typically be normed for her age and her sex. So we're kind of comparing peer brains, right? Those are a database of brains that are optimally functioning, right? So they don't have a lot of dysregulation in them. And then basically what happens is when that program notices her brain moving in the direction of behaving in the way that the optimally functioning brains are, it rewards it. And the way the brain gets rewarded is with stimulus. And so what the stimulus is, you'll see in just a minute, and then we'll talk about it. So what I want you to do is when this game starts going, you're going to take a look and keep your eyes focused either here or on this bar on the bottom. And the idea being for you to stay focused there, to not deviate and be looking around and paying attention to everything else that's on the screen, right? But just to be focused on that, okay? So go ahead and start it up, Adam.
Looks like it's lagging a bit. I do have it going. Just retry that super quick.
Okay, so while they're doing technical difficulties work, so once Colleen starts the game, she's going to be watching, right? And her whole job is to just stay focused on the ring, right? And to do nothing else. So we always tell people, like, imagine you're hanging out with your best friend while they're playing a video game and you're just supporting them. Your best friend just happens to be your brain, which we hope it is for all of you, right? Or by the end of training, it will have become your best friend because it'll be behaving the way that you wanted it to. And then what we can do in regards to the training, I'm just going to kind of walk over to the screen here and point a couple of things out until they get yanked off. Never mind. Just like that. I get a lot of power there. So anyway, what we're doing on our end is we're able to watch Colleen's brain in real time to see whether or not the network that we're training is actually regulating. Oh, there she goes. Look at her fly. Okay, great. So, so this is, oh.
Sorry.
Okay. This is, you guys have no idea what a challenge the technology is here. But we don't want to ever make things easy. So what we're watching here now is her flying, and she's flying this griffin and just paying attention. Over here, this is the network that we're training. So let's pretend we're training Colleen's default mode network, since we've been picking on it tonight. We have it training at about 4 standard deviations above the norm. So that gives you an idea of the amount of dysregulation. All of these little colorful units in here are metrics of dysregulation. And I hesitate to ask Adam to switch and tell us how much, because I don't want him to mess this part up right now. Oh, we can look. So this one has, it looks like 455 metrics of dysregulation in this network. And so we can, as we're training, we can watch this and determine whether or not we need to tweak the training. The beautiful thing that happens with this, and I think it's why part of why our techs hang around with us and don't jump ship, is that it's pretty powerfully incredible to watch somebody's brain change in real time. It's just like, you know, and it's the brain training itself. Like, we're not doing much to it, right, other than providing some guidance to it. And so this is the process that she would go through. Typically, once she's been with us for a couple of 2-3 sessions, we've got her up maybe to training 40 minutes of neurofeedback doing this. Trying to think if there's anything else. I think that maybe good for neurofeedback. At the same time, we are also monitoring her autonomic nervous system. So you lift your hand up just a little bit. So you can see we have some sensors on her hand. She's got a belt around her belly, and we are monitoring her autonomic nervous system. We do a lot of heart rate variability training as well, which is another thing that can quiet the noise. So I'm going to hand the mic over to Guy and let him talk with you about the heart rate variability for a minute or two, and then we'll bump to questions.
Always my eternal apologies to the people online who have to put up with the changing of the microphone. Okay, so what are we looking at here? So we do a kind of a 10-channel biofeedback. So a little bit like we were looking at electrical signals from the brain when we were doing neurofeedback. Biofeedback is looking at electrical signals from the body. So really the exact same paradigm: neurofeedback, brain, biofeedback, body. So looking here, this is the respiration belt around the waist. This is the plethysmograph on her finger looking at heartbeat, or a proxy of the heartbeat, peripheral temperature, skin conductivity, how much electricity is moving through the skin, so that, you know, as our sympathetic nervous system goes up, we tend to sweat a little bit, conductivity goes up. If we're more relaxed, our skin dries, conductivity goes down. It should be stable. So if we see fluctuation here, we know a person's autonomic nervous system is more active than we would think. Blood volume pulse, so the volume of blood moving through the periphery. Adam, if you were to click on the minus sign, we'd probably get a little bit of texture there. So this is a little bit telling us about like how the heart is producing the variability up here. So we tend to just jargon call this heart rate variability, but it's really biofeedback. But one of the main things we're looking at here is heart rate variability. So heart rate variability is the best predictor of all-cause mortality. So our overall health, so partly longevity, but also how is that going to go for us? How many incidences are we going to have with the healthcare system? The lower our HRV, the more encounters with the healthcare system, and the less optimal those encounters will go. So this is a measure that connects back to kind of what we were talking about in kind of the allostatic load and how's the body doing, and the body budget. We get a pretty good readout of how the body budget is functioning, the management system, when we look at this data. So again, we look at the brain, and it's like, how is the brain managing the body? What's it doing? What's the actual functional approach that it's taking? And here we can see how well is it doing in doing that activity. So we like to do both, so we get a bottom-up and a top-down perspective of what's happening in the body. Central nervous system, autonomic nervous system, brain, body, integrated piece. So I think maybe I'll pause there, and then if there are questions about any of this, Tenzin can come back up, and you guys can go ahead and any questions you might have. And the same for our online folks. If you have questions, you can post into the chat. We've got some people that are keeping an eye on it. Yeah.
I'm curious if there's any differences either with neurofeedback, biofeedback, and with the AID device on
Sure, great question. So a couple of things nested in there, but one being about neurofeedback, biofeedback, and audiovisual entrainment, specifically for dorsal vagal innervation. Did I get it, or?
Well, when that's where their struggle is.
Yeah.
It's not sympathetic, right? We're not trying to bring them down, we're trying to get them through that polyvagal ladder, through the sympathetic to that ventral vagal.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So to say our autonomic nervous system, 3 branches: sympathetic, then parasympathetic, 2 branches, ventral and dorsal. And ventral is more what we think about when we talk about a parasympathetic effect, rest and digest. Dorsal vagal is the freeze response. So the challenge can be typically, because we think of like the gas brake model, we either want more or less gas, more or less brake. Those are that's the binary. But it turns out the Porges polyvagal theory that there's really 3 branches. How do we work with dorsal vagal or freeze response? And it is challenging. So the answer's not easy. So we would typically do a QEEG, and we would look to be seeing what's happening in the brain and how is it miswired. And say you use the example of PTSD. So one of the biomarkers for a true PTSD is a disruption in either the emotional network or the salience network. So one or the other emotional salience, which is about switching between the default mode network and the executive network. So that switch is becoming kind of a primary point of treatment. And what we've done clinically is move to treating that. And what we found is when we can kind of help rewire that or reverse that switch so it goes back to doing its job, the person becomes available to this transition that you're talking about. That if we don't start there by reversing that switch, pretty much nothing we do will really matter. At best, we'll get management, but we can get correction if we can kind of rewire that switch back to how the salient should be shifting between those 2 networks. So that's from a neurofeedback standpoint. We do a similar thing from a neurostim standpoint. It's not as precise just because the technology isn't as precise. Neurofeedback, we can be highly focused. Neurostim, it's pretty broad. And then devices are even fuzzier or less accurate. And so it's even harder to accomplish this task through a device. So we find if somebody has a true PTSD, that neurofeedback is going to be the best bet, kind of front line, and then the other things can start having positive effect. So sort of an answer to your question? Kind of, sort of? Yeah. Yeah, dorsal vagal is tough. And so we found not going after it, but going higher in the system gets us much better, much more reliable results. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Well, thank you all for coming. We're going to be around for a while, so if you want to kind of mingle a little bit, and if you had questions for Tenzin, please feel free to ask him, Fran, myself. If you wanted to try a device, just approach one of the team members and they'll wire you up and you can give it a shot. And if you haven't had something to eat, or even if you have had something to eat, have some more to eat. And thank you for coming. Would you like a picture? Oh, the screen. Oh, I thought you were a picture of you. Sure. So, and then Adam, do you still have the neurofeedback up?
Yeah, so I can show you as well.
And then maybe just close BioTrace. Save some bandwidth. Are you still in, Adam?
Everybody didn't want to do this. I thought I had to fight people.
Are you still in Riverside, Adam?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Adam, if you want, I can just hand you the HDMI and I'll end the stream.
Is it too much trouble?
No, no, it should be fine.